the first thing you learn is that the money is never the dangerous part. It's the silence around it. You're in a hotel room in Dubai, not a suite, nothing memorable. A mid-tier business hotel, the kind used by mid-level executives and men who prefer not to be remembered. The curtains are closed. The air conditioning hums at a frequency you stopped hearing years ago. On the desk, a laptop, 2 phones, a leather notebook with handwritten entries no government will ever read. Across from you sits a man you've never met. He doesn't give you his real name. You don't give him yours. He's wearing a watch worth more than most people's homes, but his shoes are cheap. That detail tells you everything you need to know. New money. Dirty money. And he's nervous. He slides a piece of paper across the desk. A wallet address. A number. 8 figures. You look at it for 3 seconds. Then you say, I can move that. But not today. And the moment those words leave your mouth, you become something the legal world doesn't have a clean name for. You are an underground crypto broker. And your life is about to become something almost no one understands. Chapter 1. How people like you get found. Nobody applies for this job. There is no resume, no certification, no career path written into any guidance counselor's brochure. You get found. It usually starts somewhere ordinary. Maybe you were a forex trader who knew a little too much about offshore structures. Maybe you ran a small over-the-counter desk during the 2017 bull run and learned how to move 6 figures without flagging an exchange. Maybe you were a junior compliance officer at a Tier 2 bank, and you watched, quietly, for years, as the same names appeared on suspicious activity reports and never faced consequences. You learned what got flagged. More importantly, you learned what didn't. Or maybe you were just someone who answered the right message on Telegram at the right time. The first client is always small. A test. $50,000. Maybe 100. They want crypto for cash, or cash for crypto, and they want it done without paperwork, without questions, without a digital footprint that connects them to the transaction. You do it cleanly. You take a fee, 2%, maybe 5%. The client is satisfied. They tell one other person, then another. Within 6 months, you're not handling 50,000 anymore. You're handling 5 million. And the people calling you are not the people you imagined when you started. Chapter 2. The clients you don't ask about. There is a rule in this business that nobody teaches you, but everyone learns. You do not ask where the money comes from. You do not ask where it's going. You only ask the questions that protect you. Is the source wallet clean on-chain analysis? Does the counterparty have a history of disputes? Is the meeting location secure? Does the cash carry tracer die, marked serials, or sequential bills that suggest a bank withdrawal traceable to a name? You never ask the questions that would force you to make a moral decision. Because if you start asking those questions, you stop being useful. So you learn to recognize patterns instead. The Russian oil trader, who needs to move funds out of a sanctioned jurisdiction before quarterly enforcement reviews. The Nigerian businessman whose company exports nothing but somehow generates 8 figures in revenue. The Chinese national who needs to convert yuan into Bitcoin, into dollars before capital controls tighten. The Latin American politician whose wife handles the wallets. The European hedge fund manager who wants a quiet way to compensate someone who isn't supposed to be on his payroll. The cartel intermediaries are the easiest to spot. They're polite, punctual. They never negotiate aggressively. They don't need to. The intelligence-adjacent clients are harder. They speak in clean sentences. They reference jurisdictions you've never worked in. They pay your fee without flinching. And they disappear without trace. You start to understand, slowly, that the world has 2 financial systems running in parallel. The visible one, with regulators and swift codes and quarterly filings. And the other one, the one you now work in. Chapter 3. The mechanics. Most people imagine crypto crime as something fast. Hackers in hoodies, anonymous transfers, money vanishing into the blockchain like smoke. The reality is slower, quieter, infinitely more boring. A standard transaction in your world looks like this. A client wants to move $8 million from a holding company registered in the British Virgin Islands into a series of personal wallets in 3 different jurisdictions. The funds are sitting in Tether, which everyone in this industry uses because it moves like cash and clears like email. You don't move the money in one transaction. You break it into pieces. You route it through what insiders call layering corridors, chains of wallets and exchanges that exist for the specific purpose of making forensic tracing expensive enough that no one bothers. You use mixers, but not the ones the public knows about. The famous ones get sanctioned. The useful ones operate quietly, in jurisdictions that don't cooperate with American or European agencies. And they charge a premium that is somehow always exactly what the market will bear. You convert between coins. Tether to Monero, Monero to Bitcoin. Bitcoin to Ethereum, Ethereum to a stablecoin you didn't recognize 5 years ago, issued by a company nobody can find a real office for. Each conversion adds friction. Each friction adds opacity. By the time the money arrives at its final wallet, the original source is buried under 14 layers of transactions across 9 platforms in 6 jurisdictions. A blockchain analytics firm could, in theory, follow it, but they won't, because the cost of doing so exceeds the value of any single case they're working on. And the people who could afford to fund such an investigation have no interest in disturbing the systems that quietly serve them too. Chapter 4. The cash problem. Crypto is the easy part. Cash is where people get caught. When a client wants to convert $1 million of Bitcoin into clean physical currency, the logistics become a different kind of problem. Cash has weight. Cash has volume. $1 million in $100 bills weighs about 22 pounds and fills a medium gym bag. $1 million in 50s or 20s doesn't fit in luggage at all. You don't carry it yourself. You have couriers. People who get paid a flat fee to move bags across cities or borders, who never know what they're carrying, who would tell the police they thought it was documents if they were ever stopped. You have stash points, apartments rented under shell company names, paid in cash, used for a maximum of 6 months. Inside, there are safes. But the real security is the anonymity of the location. The neighbors think the unit is empty. The building manager thinks it belongs to a consultant who travels. You have laundering channels for the cash itself, restaurants in major cities that overstate their receipts, car dealerships that sell luxury vehicles to buyers who pay partially in cash, partially in crypto, jewelry stores in tourist districts that move 6 figures of inventory per week through customers no one ever follows up on. You don't own any of these businesses, but you know the people who do, and you pay them, quietly, a percentage of every flow that runs through their books. Chapter 5. The world you now live in. You stop sleeping in your own apartment more than 2 nights a week. Not because anyone is watching you, specifically, but because the habit of being unpredictable becomes a form of unconscious self-defense. You take different routes to meetings. You use a primary phone that never connects to your operational phone. You stop posting to social media. You stop appearing in photographs. Your family thinks you've become reclusive, possibly depressed. You can't tell them why. You learn to read rooms differently. In a hotel lobby, you scan for people who linger without purpose. For the same face in multiple cities. For couples who look slightly too composed. You start to recognize federal agents the way other people recognize old classmates. You stop drinking at meetings. You used to. Most brokers do. In the beginning. A whiskey to calm the nerves before a large transaction. Then one night you realize that alcohol slows your pattern recognition. And pattern recognition is the only thing standing between you and a federal indictment. You become someone your old friends wouldn't recognize. You make more money in a single quarter than most of them will earn in a decade. And it changes nothing about how you feel. Because the money sits in wallets you can't fully access without exposing yourself. Because the lifestyle you could afford would create a paper trail no broker can survive. Because the only way to keep doing this work is to spend almost none of what you earn. The new Lamborghini stays in someone else's name. The villa is leased through a holding company. The watches are bought in cash, in cities where you don't live, and worn only in rooms where everyone present already knows what you do. You learn that wealth, at this level, is not freedom. It's a different kind of prison, one with better wallpaper. Chapter 6. The network above you. You begin to understand, slowly, that you are not at the top of anything. You are middle management. In a system that extends so far above you, it doesn't have a visible ceiling. The clients you serve answer to other people. The cartel intermediary is moving funds on behalf of someone who never appears in any conversation. The oligarch's lawyer is acting on instructions routed through 3 intermediaries before reaching him. The intelligence-adjacent client is part of an apparatus that has been quietly using crypto since before most of the public knew the word. You start to notice that certain transactions move on certain days, quarterly, aligned, suspiciously, with regulatory review cycles, as if someone, somewhere, is watching the same calendars enforcement agencies use and routing the most sensitive flows around them. You start to notice that some exchanges, despite operating with apparent legitimacy, never freeze the wallets they should. That some compliance officers, at certain institutions, seem to look in the wrong direction at the right times. That some auditors, hired to certify reserves, perform inspections that any first-year analyst would recognize as theater. You start to notice that the system isn't broken. The system is functioning exactly as it was designed to. The visible regulators catch the visible criminals. The headlines cover the failures, never the architecture. The architecture itself, The quiet infrastructure that lets trillions of dollars move across jurisdictions every year through channels that don't appear on any official record remains untouched. Because too many powerful people in too many countries rely on it. You are a small part of a very large machine, and the machine has no interest in stopping. Chapter 7. The night the first mistake happens. It always comes from somewhere unexpected. Not from a regulator. Not from a federal agent. Not from a competitor. It comes from a client. He's a man you've worked with before. 3 transactions. All clean. He's based somewhere in Eastern Europe but operates out of a series of offices that never stay open longer than a year. He calls you on a Wednesday, late, and asks for something larger than usual. $12 million. He needs it routed quickly, through a corridor you've used dozens of times. Something in his voice is different. You can't name it, but you've trained yourself to listen for it. You ask him to wait 24 hours. He pushes back, polite, but firm. He needs it done tonight. You agree. You shouldn't have. 3 weeks later, you read in a financial news article that the man has been arrested, not by his own country's authorities, by an international task force, working in cooperation with 3 different agencies, in a coordinated operation that had been running for 14 months. You sit very still for a long time. You think about the corridor he used, the exchanges, the wallets, the intermediaries, the footprint, however careful, that you left across each layer. You think about the meetings he attended in the past year, the people he spoke to, the phones he carried. You think about how many of those phones might have been compromised. You think about what an investigator, sitting in a windowless office in London or Washington, might already know about you. Not your name, not your face, necessarily, but your patterns, your timing, your style, the way you structure layering, the fee percentages you charge. A signature, in this business, is something you build, whether you mean to or not. And signatures, once identified, are matched. You don't sleep that night. You don't sleep properly again for a long time. Chapter 8. What burnout looks like. You don't quit. Almost no one does, voluntarily. You think about it. You make plans. You promise yourself you'll do 3 more transactions. Build a clean exit fund. Route the money into something legitimate. Walk away and never look back. But the calls keep coming. The clients keep offering more. The fees keep growing. And every time you almost stop, someone offers you a transaction so lucrative, or so important, or so urgent, that it would be operationally unforgivable to refuse. You start to notice a slow erosion in yourself. Decisions you used to make carefully, you now make quickly. Risks you used to refuse, you now accept. Relationships you used to maintain, you now neglect. You stop calling your mother on her birthday. You miss the funeral of a friend, because the timing conflicts with a transaction. You realize, one quiet morning in a city you don't live in, that you cannot remember the last conversation you had that wasn't about money. The money itself stops mattering. What replaces it is something stranger, a kind of identity, a sense that you have become specialized in something almost no one in the world can do at your level, that you have access to rooms most people will never see, that you are part of a system that, for all its danger, makes you feel like one of the very few who actually understand how the world works. It is the most dangerous feeling in this business, because it convinces you that you are not replaceable, when in fact you are entirely, instantly replaceable. The moment you become inconvenient, the network around you reconfigures. Your clients find a new broker. Your suppliers find a new buyer. Your laundering channels find a new operator. The machine continues. Only you stop. You look in the mirror one night, in a hotel bathroom in a city you can't remember booking a flight to, and you don't fully recognize the man looking back. He has your face, but not your eyes. Chapter 9. The invisible economy you are part of. Step back for a moment. The annual flow of illicit funds through the global financial system is estimated, by the most conservative analysts, at between $2 and $3 trillion per year. The real figure is almost certainly higher. Some forensic economists who study cross-border money movement suggest it could exceed $5 trillion. A meaningful percentage of that now moves through crypto, not all of it. Cash is still the dominant medium for narcotics. Real estate is still the favored asset class for sanctioned wealth. Trade-based money laundering, the practice of falsifying invoices in international shipping to move value across borders, still accounts for more total volume than any cryptocurrency mechanism. But crypto has become the connective tissue. It is how the cash gets converted, how the trade-based laundering settles, how the offshore structures rebalance, how the sanctioned funds find their way back into legitimate-looking accounts. And the brokers, the people like you, are the human interface between the visible and invisible economies. You are not the criminals. You are not the masterminds. You are not the source of the money. You are the translators. And translators, in this world, get paid extraordinarily well. until the day they don't. Chapter 10. The end no one warned you about. There are 3 ways out of this business. The first is arrest, usually preceded by months of surveillance you didn't notice. By interviews of people you forgot you'd met. By digital forensics on devices you thought you'd destroyed. The arrest itself is almost anticlimactic. A knock on a hotel door at 5 in the morning. 2 agents. Calm, polite, professional. They've already won. They've known about you longer than you knew about yourself. The second is disappearance. The kind that happens when a client decides you've become a liability. Or a competitor decides you've taken too much of their market. Or an intelligence service decides that whatever you know is more useful sitting at the bottom of an industrial river than walking around in a hotel lobby in Dubai. The third is the rarest. You walk away. You become someone who, after years of doing this, simply decides one morning that the next transaction is the last. You close the wallets you can close. You burn the phones. You stop responding to the messages. You move to a country you've never operated in, under a name you've quietly built for years, and you live, modestly, on funds you spent half a decade carefully cleaning. You don't talk about what you used to do. You don't write a book. You don't give interviews. You don't even tell the people closest to you. You sit in a small apartment, in a quiet city, and you read the news. You see the headlines about exchanges collapsing, about sanctioned oligarchs whose assets somehow reappear in new jurisdictions, about regulators announcing crackdowns that change nothing. And you understand, in a way almost no one in the legitimate world ever will, exactly how the money actually moves. You understand which headlines are real, and which are theater. You understand which regulators are functioning, and which are performing. You understand which institutions are clean, and which are the cleanest looking laundromats in history. You carry that knowledge quietly. You don't share it, because the moment you do, the machine remembers you. And the machine you've learned never forgets the people who used to work for it. The hotel room in Dubai is empty now. The man with the cheap shoes is gone. The wallet address has been used and forgotten. The 8 figures have moved, somewhere, through corridors most people will never know existed. You close the laptop. You sit in the silence for a long time. And somewhere, in a city you have never visited, an analyst at a financial intelligence unit is staring at a pattern on a screen, trying to understand why a particular sequence of transactions, originating from sources he cannot quite identify, keeps appearing in his data. He doesn't know your name. He doesn't know your face, but he is starting to recognize your signature. And in this business, that is always how it ends. Quietly, in a room you don't know about, by someone you have never met.